Hello everyone, greetings from the 7th of Nero. AJ here, continuing the series on the various armies of Warmachine. This time looking at an old favourite who have received something of an updated look for Mark IV and some improved technology. Imagine box magazines. Not much of an introduction needed, so we'll just get on with it. Though that said, this will be the first of only a small handful of factions, two so far, for whom that updated look can be incorporated into this series of marginally more detailed looks at the lore of their militaries. Since this is the first of those two, what follows will not really feature much on this update beyond a couple references due to the lack of detailed lore concerning it. As such, I believe this will be, at least partially, indicative of what Cygnar's piece will be like. Of the Iron Kingdoms, Khador has perhaps the most integrated armed forces as far as regional distribution, local militias, and how they relate to civilian life are concerned. As the geographically largest of the civilized nations, at least in the West, I have not had the opportunity or inclination to study the lands of the Scorn Empire in their entirety. I digress. And as the most geographically diverse one, Khador is home to an unmatched range of human ethnicities, and neither High Command nor Kratikoff Palace allow exceptions where conscription is concerned. Yet, having recruits from such a broad range of origins and expecting them to quickly fight alongside and die for each other is often beyond the hope of drill sergeants, for Khadoran obstinacy is as much a regional trait as a national one. And while Umbrians and Vardensky may both love State and Empress, they may not necessarily admire each other. Even so, all parts of a nation require protection and the means to provide it. As such, the great princes of the Volodskya can often call upon substantial forces formed from locally trained militias, including region-unique levies. At the core of Khador's three armies are its officers, at least as High Command's more hawkish and politically factional are quick to reiterate. Trained at the Druzhina, only those who successfully endure the physically and intellectually grueling process of turning a candidate into an officer go on to lead formations in the Empress's armies. And while it is true those whose pocketbook is thick enough can buy their way into the Khadoran Military Academy, High Command cares only for skill, and only allow the best to pass out, irrespective of who a cadet's parents or patrons might be, and even if the cadet was once a lowly peasant, conscripted to the Winter Guard. And because of the resources which go into producing the next generation of the nation's new officers, few graduates consider anything else but a life as a career soldier. Among the most dedicated, retirement is forced upon them by death, injury, or simple old age, and even then, many older officers simply move to logistical or administrative positions when command in the field becomes too difficult for them, especially for those who served in specialist corps. Many, though, return to the Druzhina, where they impart their skills accumulated over decades of active service upon their potential successors, as well as advising on updated curricula as technology and tactics evolve over time. As to the troops these typically esteemed officers command, a fair majority of the Khadoran army's almost 2/3 soldiers are the rank and file of the Winter Guard, perhaps the oldest of the unifying military traditions in Khador, and the source of much of the nation's propaganda. And it is easy to see why, for the Winter Guard has long been built upon the concept of the common farmer or labourer thrust into the forge of war in the name of Queen and country, and their defence. From humble beginnings can be a saga of glory and heroism. More prosaic, however. The Winter Guard is simply the convenient, if no less formal, label for conscript soldier given a somewhat Khadoran flavour. Even so, there is more to the Khadoran military system than simply gathering the youth of the nation and indoctrinating them in the infallibility of state and crown. Conscription has done a great deal to unify the disparate provinces, for it compels the adaptation of the recruits to each other and the invariably different environment which they had hitherto been accustomed to, as well as demonstrating the various virtues of people from the far reaches of the empire. This kinship, which develops among conscripts who share all aspects of their lives together for the duration of their training and service, is known to continue well past the end of their service. For nothing brings out recollections of camaraderie among veterans like the sight of the Winter Guard's red uniforms when on parade, or putting theirs on when, before the outbreak of war, they have been called to muster. As to be expected of a modern regular force, the Winter Guard are well versed in the practical basics of, if not the latest, then at least comparative and competitive military technology. All new conscripts are trained in the use of typical small arms, often the simple blunderbuss, while others join the growing and ever-modernising rifle corps. The best among the recruits receive further training in other weapons, most notably the rocket launcher, and from among them, a select cohort go on to man the Winter Guard's artillery, consisting of the light field guns and mortars. There is a different path, though, which can be taken by those who have the prerequisite background or skill. From the Rifle Corps, those who score highest in marksmanship can join the Widowmakers, expert scouts and snipers, trained and conditioned to cause chaos among the enemy by selecting priority targets. Elsewhere, in more recent years, a new corps was founded as an extension of the Winter Guard due to lessons learned from extended trench warfare against Cygnar. This was the Assault Commandos, who would accept only the hardiest of new recruits. Their impact was soon felt after their formal establishment, being responsible for as much as decapitating the Lealese army, systematically ambushing senior commanders thanks to one Commander Strikeoff's planning. The invasion would only enhance the commandos, for capture of the Golden Crucible's headquarters at the Thunderhead brought them access to new alchemical ammunition and their countermeasures. Representing the elite of Khador's army, and the traditions carried over from the ancient days of the Khardic Empire, the Iron Fangs are a heavily armoured and professional counterpart to the more skirmish-like and conscript troops of the Winter Guard, who are protected only by their greatcoats and a sense of self-preservation. The Iron Fang pikemen stride into battle carrying tower shields, pike, tipped with devastating blasting charges, and composite mail and plate armour to present an unbreakable wall upon which an enemy attack may break. Given the nature of the tactics used by the Iron Fang Corps, the bond shared between them is strong, and severed only by death in battle more often than not. So much so, those who survive long enough and who should, by logic, have long retired, often go on to join the Black Dragons, whose average age is matched only by the reverence with which they are treated by the other Khadoran soldiers. Their skill in battle, invaluable experience, unshakable morale, and the effect they have on ally and enemy alike means they make a powerful reserve force whose use in such a capacity gave rise to the expression to fall back upon the Black Dragons as testament to their capabilities. And alongside the pikemen ride the Iron Fang Uhlans, similarly heavily armoured cavalry who trace their lineage back to the Khardic horse lords of yesteryear. They wield a lance very similar to the pikeman's weapon, albeit adapted for use from horseback. Said horses are specially bred Pozdyov war horses, large and strong enough to not only carry a mail and plate armoured rider, but their own armour, and with enough stamina to do so for longer than any would consider possible. By such means, the Uhlans are the hammer to the pikeman's anvil. It is no secret that Khador has typically struggled to acquire the precious metals which are necessary to craft military-grade cortexes for their warjacks, and so an alternative to the economically unviable light warjack has been part of Khador's armies for the better part of a century and a half. The Corps of Steam-armoured men of war, originally formed around the shock troopers, stand as the Empire's heaviest infantry units and are debatably the most heavily armoured soldiers in all of the Iron Kingdoms. But no matter which branch recruits become a part of, whether the shock troopers who form the general line of battle, the demolition corps who spearhead sieges, or the bombardiers who provide fire support, there is a certain silent pride which comes with donning the man-of-war armour. These soldiers are considered the bravest of line troops in Khador's army, and not just because successful recruits to the corps must withstand the trial known as the Crusher. By all accounts I've heard, it is a quite uncompromising 3-day test of endurance, strength and discipline. Their armour allows and often obliges them to enter the fray where the heaviest enemy fire is most concentrated, but the armour itself is also a source of peril to the wearer. Try as the maintenance mechanics might, some of whom wear the armour themselves as they go about their repair work on the battlefield, the apparatus strapped to their backs, amounting to a boiler and compact steam engine, is dangerous in terms of its operating temperature, the weight of its individual parts, and its nature as essentially the shell of an armoured golem. Broken gears, cracks in protective plating, and malfunctioning parts within the engine can all lead to the wearer's most unpleasant death. But the man-of-war troopers weather such risks without qualm, and fight and die with pride no matter how that death may come. Perhaps braver still are the man-of-war dragoons, an elite group selected from among the man-of-war infantry, who not only wear the steam armour, but do so from atop great Carpathian destriers, which dwarf even the Pozdyov mounts of the Iron Fang Uhlans. The steam armour of the rider and similarly heavy destrier plate far outweighs what the smaller warhorse carries. The dragoons' skill at arms and horsemanship extends to personally training their mounts. After even a handful of campaigns' worth of battle experience, this results in horse and rider being a singular presence in combat. And more recently, further developments to the man-of-war armoury gave rise to a small but nonetheless powerful handful of units equipped with new devastating weaponry unique to the Corps. These were the companies of tankers and squadrons of man-of-war chariots, which appear to have taken the man-of-war philosophy of war to its natural extreme. Concerning the use of the arcane, to be sure, a fair proportion of Khadorans, especially those of a rural, provincial, and or Mennite background, are wary around the topic of magic, though I am uncertain whether this is a majority or not. They believe the positive use of the arcane to be the realm of the priesthood, while all other magic is some form of evil. While such sentiments may be hyperbole, it is nonetheless true that despite their acceptance of warcasters, less educated Khadorans are suspicious of the Grey Lord Covenant, irrespective of that organisation's importance to the nation's military development. The majority of Grey Lord Arcanists who take to the field do so in groups of 3, known as Turnians, who act as support to whichever formation of conventional soldiers they accompany, applying their wintry magic to amplify the impact of traditional military force with minimal manpower investment. With so few Grey Lords compared to regular troops though, they cannot be assigned to every command as officers may desire, or cover more ground across a front of war than they are capable of being on foot. They have a counterpart formation in the Grey Lord Outriders, Arcanists trained to wield their magic as manoeuvrable cavalry, to bring their abilities to where they are required most. But one would be mistaken to believe Arcanists are all of the Grey Lord's business. The fell artefacts abandoned by the retreating Morgoth after their first attempt to invade Imoran were exploited by the necromancers and iron lichers of Crix, but no few were collected by the Arcanists of Khador. Such artefacts included the Fellblades, forced upon crazed Doomreaver swordsmen, and the staves of control carried by attendant Grey Lords who ensured the Doomreavers do not deal too much damage to allies, though there are a few Khadoran soldiers who do not remain wary and keep their distance nonetheless. Less questionable than the Doomreavers, whether to friend or enemy, are the Forge Seers, who are masters of not just the arcane, but the mechanical. Because of their combined skill as spellcasters and keepers of much of the Grey Lord's more niche arcane lore, they have multiple responsibilities supporting warjacks and developing and maintaining mechanica, as well as what one would expect from those of the Grey Lords. And attached to many Khadoran forces are irregular companies, which includes those who are recognised by High Command and those who are not, at least not officially. Among the former are the Cossacks, who bring the traditions of hunters, pioneers and borderers from the Khadoran north. Able to apply their skills on the campaign trail as scouts and tactical specialists for the Winterguard legions, the Cossacks, often in company with the Widowmakers, many of whom are rural hunters themselves, the Cossacks fulfill roles which few among the irregular soldiers of the Khadoran military are trained for. They exploit intimate knowledge of Khadoran geography and adapt techniques for traversing and hunting amongst the unwelcoming hills and forests in enemy territory. But what separates the Cossite from Widowmaker is their integration. The Widowmakers are trained alongside the Winterguard and can operate as part of the normal military hierarchy. Meanwhile, the Cossites and the occasional, but nonetheless ominously nicknamed, Manhunters are that part of the Khadoran military attached to a formation, yet apart from it. As to the Kayazi, on the other hand, their involvement in Khadoran military affairs is less organised and formal, both. In reality, the word Kayazi refers to the growing bourgeoisie merchant middle classes of Khadoran society, but such circles have ever been as cutthroat as such things as scorn and Laeli's politics. Thus, those who could afford to either established gangs or paid for hired muscle, which often existed as part of an already long-standing gang. This allowed them to undermine rivals, remain tapped into the Khadoran urban underworld, and preserve their own security. Such gangs eventually went into business for themselves, determining the balance of power in their own right, and those with extensive influence and wealth have long held a presence in other countries. These overseas cells of Kayazis quietly lend their services to military efforts where appropriate, and it is no surprise they were very active during Khador's invasion of Lael. Unsurprisingly, the Kayazi have scaled back their overt activities in recent years while the Iron Kingdoms have recovered from the infernal invasion. At the same time, change has come to the Khadoran army, just as it has to their rivals. But whether it is enough for the coming storm remains to be seen as the nations of Imoran are once more plunged into a new era of war and bloodshed.